They say that Christmas is the holiday to be jolly, merry, joyful. It's also the holiday that causes depression. There's darkness as well as difficulties, and so I'm taking a step out here, and we're going to address the topic of mental illness. Of course, just by addressing that topic, some may feel like I'm a part of the cause of mental illness. As I was researching mental illness this week, I came across several articles entitled things like Christianity is the cause of mental illness. In fact, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens sell millions of books by proclaiming religion is the root of all evil and religion poisons everything. So, of course, I do not believe that. I do believe that the Bible addresses mental illness. And I want to take you to a passage in Mark. Mark chapter 5. I want to read to you there. It says there, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure or unclean spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons from his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice. Some translations, he screamed out, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs and allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead, or they begged with Jesus, to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. An interesting story about a demon-possessed man. I'm using that as the foundation this morning to talk about a subject that not many are willing to talk about. A lot of things have been taboo in our society, but this one seems to continue. I want to define mental illness, first of all. This is how it was defined on a website about mental illness. Mental illness is any disease or condition that influences the way a person thinks, feels, behaves, and or relates to others and to his or her surroundings. Although the symptoms of mental illness can range from mild to severe and are different depending on the type of mental illness, a person with an untreated mental illness is often unable to cope with life's daily routines and demands. Although the exact cause of most mental illnesses is not known, it's becoming clear through research that many of these conditions are caused by a combination of genetic, biological, physiological, psychological, and environmental factors. And recovery from mental illness is not simply a matter of will or self-discipline. What we have here in this passage is a man in a very difficult situation. He's living in the tombs, which means he's living with decay and death. He's often alone in darkness. There's destruction, partly caused by him, as he rips chains and irons apart, and there's desertion. Nobody wants to be around him, obviously. There's detention. Some people try to fix this problem by restraining him, which obviously didn't work. There's demonic dereliction, and obviously Jesus points out he is demon-possessed. And I know that we live in a society that likes to talk and think in more scientific terms. We don't like to talk about mental illness in spiritual terms, but there is a spiritual dimension to it. I will try to put this in perspective, but obviously this man has more of a problem than just mental illness caused by some physical problem. He is demon-possessed. And delirious of pain and pleasure. He gets pleasure out of hurting himself, cutting himself. So we see that as the situation. Now, there's the passage. I want to go beyond that. We all are striving, I think, for mental health. Are we not? Everybody wants mental health. Is that not correct? Well, there's been confusion in society about mental illness. Throughout history, mental illness has been met with confusion, misunderstanding, mistreatment, even horror, persecution, and torture. Though we've made progress in fits and starts, people with mental illness have never had more hope for productive life than they have now. But despite the progress, we still live in a society that is deeply confused about mental illness and even somewhat ashamed of mental illness. And in the church, unfortunately, there's confusion. Amy Simpson has said, Christian communities still have a fear of the mentally ill. In part, they do not understand mental illness. In part, there's a false assumption that the Christian life should always be an easy path. And in part, the problem of suffering is hard to grasp. And so we kind of want to feel that if once you come to the Lord, that all your problems are solved. And of course, as we know, that is totally incorrect. Now there is a solution in the gospel. A part of that solution, it comes in this life as God transforms us in the process of transforming us into the image of Christ. God is at work in us to correct and to change us. That's true. But there's a part of our problem that will never really be solved this side of heaven. That's part of what the hope of the gospel is all about. It's not just this side of heaven. This is where we want the solution, this side of heaven. But God says the ultimate solution comes the other side. So let's talk a little bit about mental health and mental illness. I want to give you some guiding principles that I have found are biblical principles as well as practical principles. And the first one is this: mental health is more than the absence of mental illness. Now, just ask my wife, for instance. This would be like saying, not that she's mentally ill, although sometimes I've wondered. She's probably wondered about me too a few times. However, it'd be like saying, because I don't feel sick today, I'm obviously in good health. That is not necessarily true. Ask my wife. She's been retaining fluids and her joints are real stiff and she's finding it hard to move. So she went to the doctor for help, and I think she saw a nurse practitioner because the doctor wasn't available. But anyway, she went through these tests, and according to the test, she's in good health. But she doesn't feel like she's in good health. So just remember that. Just because you aren't mentally ill doesn't mean you're mentally healthy. The second thing I think we need to make sure we're clear on is that sin may lead to mental illness, as it possibly did in this man's case. The demonic possession drove and brought on this mental illness that he had. Obviously, it was the source of mental illness, because when the demons were cast out, he returned to sound mental health. However, even though sin may lead to mental illness, and mental illness may lead to sin, but mental illness itself is not a sin. Okay? We need not look down on people who are struggling with mental illness or mental problems. It's not necessarily a sign that they've done something wrong. Number 3, mental illness is more common than we realize. In fact, this is from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. 1 in 4 Americans suffers from some kind of mental illness in any given year. You realize that's a fourth of us, 25% of us. I'm trying to figure out which 25% in here, but oh well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that right now. However, understand, this is a big problem. Also, let's admit, we are more uncomfortable with mental illness than we want to admit. We don't really want to talk about it or think about it. And as I get older, and I've seen the elderly who have had some form of dementia, not just Alzheimer's, and I do get a little frustrated when people call it old-timers. Maybe they're just joking, but it's Alzheimer's, okay? Let's be clear about this disease. But that's just only one form of dementia. People who are struggling with mind issues in older years. As I've seen that, I've prayed, God, please, please, please. I'm going to do everything I can to keep as much mental health as I can. We also need to understand, although we believe in the gospel and the power of the gospel and the power of Jesus Christ to change hearts and lives, mental illness is not an easy fix. And we certainly can't fix it ourselves. Now, God has a part to play in that, and so do trained professionals. And so does, at times, medication. Although I believe, and maybe you will agree with me, whether you agree with me or not, I'll say it anyway, I believe we live in an over-medicated society when we're looking for a pill to fix our problems, every problem. Oh, that would be wonderful if they could find pills that do that, but obviously what happens is we take a pill to solve a problem, and it may help one problem, but as you should know from hearing the commercials, there are a lot of other problems that could arise from this solution. So we need to understand that this is not an easy thing to deal with. Number 6, mental illness is sometimes associated with demonic activity. And that isn't one possible source. It's not the only one, but certainly in extreme cases that could be a possibility. And in our scientific society, we're going to find a way to describe it in scientific terms rather than spiritual terms. Also, our spiritual condition, we just need to be reminded, affects our overall condition. That even struggling with mental illness, if we're seeking spiritual help, that will help us in our condition. So those are some guiding principles that I want you to be aware of. Now, let's look at the incident for just a moment. Number one, the demons beg Jesus. And by the way, there are 4 different times that we see in this passage somebody begging. Somebody begging Jesus. The demons beg Jesus through the man, first of all. And you know, it's interesting, when you first read this, it's hard to know who is speaking. Is it the man who rushes up to Jesus and bows down and pleads with him? Or is it the demons? There's a real interaction there. It's hard to tell who's in control. Kind of makes you wonder if there's not some kind of schizophrenia in here with this situation. But the plea is the avoidance of discomfort. And by the way, when you're facing mental illness or struggling with mental illness, you know, sometimes the thing you know, the devil you know, is better than the one you don't know, you think. You know, you're not sure if you want to change because you're not sure the change is going to be any better. Well, the demons beg Jesus through the man not to send them away. Then the demons beg Jesus directly because they're concerned about their influence, since he's going to cast them out of this man. And they, although they are reluctant and they struggle and fight against his authority, they cannot reject his authority. They cannot overrule his authority. When Jesus has spoken, it's going to happen. They may put up a fight, but it's going to happen. They are concerned about their influence, and they ask him not to send them away from the area. And notice Jesus doesn't suggest that they possess this herd of pigs. The demons request that. And of course, when they possess the pigs, what happens? The pigs rush off the cliff to their destruction. Now, I don't know that the demons saw that coming, because the reason they wanted the pigs was because they wanted to stay in the area and have some influence. They didn't see that coming. And some people may question why Jesus would allow the pigs to be destroyed in that way, would allow the demons to enter them and destroy the pigs, a great herd of pigs. But there's more at stake here than just a herd of pigs. I'm afraid another problem in our society, and I'm just going to put it out there, I could get in a lot of trouble, but we have the problem of caring more about animals than we do about people. Now, I love animals, don't get me wrong, but the soul of an animal is not as valuable in God's eyes as the soul of a person. I have some other interesting ideas about animals. For instance, I believe there will be animals on this earth in what we call the new heavens and new earth. But anyway, that's my take on the pigs. You know, I'm not against pork either. The third thing is the Gerasenes beg Jesus to leave because they are fearful of his power, and they are, let's put it this way, they are more concerned with profit than they are people. Somebody's just lost a very profitable herd of pigs. And they want Jesus to be out of the area before they lose anything else of value. And then, of course, the restored man begs to stay with Jesus. Now, Jesus grants the request of the demons to go into the pigs. He answers or agrees to the request of the Gerasenes for him to leave, but he doesn't grant the man's request to stay with him. And some people have wondered about that. Doesn't Jesus want this man to be around him? That's not the issue. The issue is what's good for this man. And Jesus believes it's better for this man to stay where he is and be a witness. It's more important for him to be a witness around the people that knew him and know him. And for them to see how Jesus has changed him, than for him to go with Jesus where he possibly will be more, there'll be less stability and more challenge. So, that's the passage that we're looking at. But I want to move beyond that. First, you talked about things that we should not do, that we must not do concerning mental illness. Number one, we must not try to understand their behavior through the lens of our own experience. In other words, to try to understand mental illness when you have not experienced mental illness, and to try to figure out what someone else is thinking and doing when you have not experienced it, and even if you have, you may not have experienced exactly what they have. To try to understand that is very difficult at best. So we need to give up trying to understand and trying to think the way they think. Obviously, if they're mentally ill, they are not thinking correctly, or they're not thinking the way they need to think. Or they would be mentally healthy. Second thing we don't need to do is to distance ourselves, treating them like lepers, like they've got some contagious disease, that if we're around them, we'll become mentally ill. That's also problematic. We should not ignore them, hoping they will get the help they need somewhere else. That people need Christian love, Christian kindness. They need to experience hope through others. And so we have an opportunity to reach out to people who are struggling with mental illness if we refuse to ignore them. And number four, especially, we must refuse to reject them outright. Just get them out of here. Don't want anything to do with them. No, that is definitely wrong. Number five, anything we can't understand, what do we usually do? We fear it. We should not fear them. And we shouldn't tell them to get fixed and then come back. You know, we love you. You go get your problem fixed, and then you can come back and be a part of us. And number seven, we must not think that Bible reading and prayer are the cure. Now, they may be helpful. They may be a part of the cure, but to think that all you need to do is read your Bible and pray and your problem will be solved, especially with mental illness, is not right. It's not correct. And we should not give them simplistic answers or act like we know how to fix their problem, because we're not trained professionals. We love the Lord. We love them. The best thing that we can do to help them is to not judge them and not throw out trite answers that don't help them, that really frustrate them. Because then they get the idea that, well, there must be something wrong with me because I'm reading my Bible and I'm praying and I should be fixed. So what must we do? First of all, we must educate ourselves about mental health and mental illness. One example of that is Robin Williams. Remember all the hype in the news media about Robin Williams when he committed suicide in 2014? The news reports attributed his death to depression coupled with substance abuse and linked his struggles to the struggles of other performers with similar issues. But new evidence suggests something totally different. For instance, according to his widow, Susan Williams, the comedian had no alcohol or illegal drugs in his system when he died, and he had been sober for 8 years. Nor was his death the result of depression. Rather, he was a victim of what Susan calls the chemical warfare that no one knew about. Specifically, her husband, Robin Williams, was a victim of Lewy body dementia, LBD, a progressive disease caused when the normal proteins in the brain begin to aggregate, they begin to collect, and interfere with the brain's ability to transmit signals. LBD victims experience confusion, reduced attention span, memory loss, hallucinations, and wide mood swings. The doctors who examined the autopsy results told Susan that her husband's disease progression was one of the worst that they had ever seen. And now she believes that Robin knew that he was losing his cognitive abilities and chose to die rather than to allow his condition to get worse. It's easy for, and the media does this just as much as anybody else, it's easy for us to jump to conclusions, and we want to know, so we figure out, we make up the story. Even though we don't have all the facts, we make up the story. And then we present it as truth. And then, before you know it, everybody believes what? Well, it was depression and drug abuse that caused his death. We need to educate ourselves so that we don't disseminate false information. Number two, we must admit that most of us really don't know what it's like to live with mental illness. Again, we can try to understand, but we really have no basis for understanding unless we've really struggled with mental illness ourselves. Third, and this is important in a lot of different areas, but when you're dealing with the mentally ill, say nothing if you don't know what to say. Remember Job. Remember his friends, who sat silently with him for 7 days, and they accomplished more in their silence than they did in all of that verbiage that follows. Well, it's only when they started trying to say something that they really messed things up. In fact, God was so mad at Job's friends that he told Job to pray for them. Remember? Job prays for them. So be careful about the tongue. We've been studying, the men and I, and I think Tony started, we've been studying the tongue. We've been studying actually Proverbs, but just so many Proverbs have to do with the tongue, with our language. James had it right. The tongue is a deadly evil, full of poison, set on fire by hell. We need to be careful. Careful about what we say. Number 4, encourage the mentally ill to pursue treatment. You can't make them, you can't force them. Everybody who receives help has to come to a place where they admit they need it. You understand that? You know that. Experience has taught you that, right? You can't force anybody to get well. but you can encourage them. Number 5, realize that even people in treatment need Christian fellowship, that you may not be a part of the team of physicians who are helping. You may not have the expertise that professionals have, but one thing you can offer is love. And that's one thing people need and appreciate. Number 6, acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, but we're willing to help. We don't have all the answers, but we want to help. We care. And number 7, pray. Do you believe that prayer is powerful? Pray. Encourage and accept the mentally ill. I want us to be, as we have always been, a church with open arms to people with problems, to people in need. I want us to reach out and help people and not judge them, but love them. And let them know what the gospel of Jesus Christ is capable of doing. We do know in Mark chapter 5 that the power of Jesus released that man from his mental bondage. Let's pray.